Hey, well, good late morning, everyone. And considering this is the last session block for the meeting, I'm thrilled to have a nice turnout, really. I understand some people may need to leave because you have planes to catch or things. So of course, it's understood if you have to get up and go, or if you're voting with your feet because this isn't working for you or whatever. But hi, I'm Steve Young. I was a 30+ year Environmental Protection Agency person. I retired from EPA. I mostly do volunteer work these days. And among other things, I've been going to ESIP meetings for something like 20+ years. I don't know, I've lost track. But Beth Huffer, Beth is here. Beth Huffer and I co-chaired the ESIP Air Quality Cluster, and we always welcome more people to participate in our monthly calls. We probably won't do one this month because we will have just had this meeting. And I know a few of you, we did an unconference session on Chat GPT yesterday that some of you were at. That was really a lot of fun, I thought. So I was sort of inspired by what happened in the unconference. I am not a deeply technical person, so I sort of biased the prep work that I did toward Chat GPT because that was more straightforward for me. I know there are people in the room who are much more technical than I am. So what we're going to do after a very short intro is invite people, if they want to kind of self-organize into little small groups to explore and share. Like if some of you have really figured out some stuff using, for example, plugins, embeds, or you're working with a different platform, it doesn't have to be Chat GPT, and you'd like to kind of self-organize, that is welcome. This is supposed to be a workshop format, very informal and interactive. So we'll sort of see how that evolves. But I will ask that you go to the document that we're showing here and sign in. And also we're going to try to capture, it can be somewhat free form, but we're going to try to capture notes. So anyone, if you have an idea, an observation, anything, please feel free to put that in the document so we're capturing your smarts. With that, I did want to just very quickly go to a kind of chat in progress that's focused on air quality within Chat GPT, and it's linked from here so you can see it. And let me see if I can do this without blundering around too much. Oh, maybe I do need help. Sorry.
It's just in another Google window. So you can go up like this and then switch to this.
Yeah, you're much more agile than I am.
Oh, wait, wasn't that?
There we go. So this chat is linked, and you can hop in on the chat, your own instance basically, and pursue it. But I feel like the big finding for me as I experimented with Chat GPT was building context. So in this particular chat, I actually started out by asking Chat GPT, can I give you a whole bunch of air quality vocabulary terms and concepts? Just basically paste them in, and can you organize those? And I had this poorly organized, but it was a lot of the terminology, a lot of the terms, acronyms, stuff like that. And of course, Chat GPT said, of course, go ahead, more power to you. So I threw in this poorly organized, there's a bunch of crap here, right? But a lot of these are terms that are, important if you're trying to understand air quality and, some of the stuff. So what I discovered was Chat GPT, as I conducted the conversation, more and more context was being built. And air quality, there's so much documentation out there that when the large language model, the LLM, was built, there was a lot of reliable information on air quality that was ingested into the model. So by and large, in asking Chat GPT questions, I was finding it was usually a pretty good response at what I would call the knowledge level. So, like I could ask it, explain AQI, and I could get a decent explanation about what is the air quality index, what does that mean? So we've been thinking in our cluster a lot about how can we help communities that are becoming concerned about air quality, but they're kind of starting from a baseline of near zero. They've heard AQI, they don't really know what it is, except it's a number, and the higher the number, the worse the air quality, code red, stuff like that. So for people in communities, potentially really useful to just get them started so they can start asking the right questions, maybe. And one of the things I prompted it with, that I owe someone that I've acknowledged in my document for this idea, I actually asked it, what questions should community members be asking about their air quality? And Chat GPT gave me some really good questions that people ought to be asking. I also asked it, what would be some good prompts that people could use, to learn more about air quality? And it gave me a pretty good list of prompts. I used one of them. So that's all. If you want to play with this conversation, it's all sitting there. And all this context has already been pre-built. But as I think everyone knows, there are major limitations to Chat GPT. It really does, it can't directly access data. There is a, time stamp limitation. It didn't ingest after, I think, September of 2021. So the information is somewhat dated, and it warns you, it tells you that kind of stuff by and large. But I did not encounter a lot of the so-called hallucinations issue when I was in the air quality domain, asking air quality questions. And again, I think it's because it's a fairly well-characterized area, and I had already established context and fed terms in and stuff. So if anyone feels like, yeah, well, I know how you can use a plugin or whatever to actually get to the data, the real-time data, please, if you want to say, hey, join me, and because we can explore. If there's not a lot of interest in breaking up, we can just interactively. We did it in the unconference yesterday with a similar crowd. We just sort of threw things at it and looked at what kind of responses we got and explored. So this can be, free form, very informal. Let me pause here for a moment. Beth, do you want to say anything, or you don't have to, but
No, I'm good.
Beth is declining. Okay. So let me try to get a sense of the room. If you feel like you've figured out some good stuff and you'd like to maybe run a small group, you want to raise your hand and say, yeah, I'm in for that. Hands, anyone? That's okay. I saw maybe half a hand, I'm not sure. I'm not seeing obvious hands. So is it okay if we just stay together as a big group and just be informal? I'm seeing a lot of nods. So, okay, well, just to kick things off, let's try. So I'm going to go all the way down to the end of the, well, actually, I guess I could just say continue this conversation, right? And so Chat GPT it's ready for more now. And again, a lot of context has already been established in this conversation. Like I asked it, tell me, explain AQI, tell me about HAPs, hazardous air pollutants. Now that was a bit of a finding. I asked for the complete list of hazardous air pollutants, and it gave me a partial list, and it was cagey in its response because it actually said the complete list of hazardous air pollutants includes, And it gave me, which technically was correct, but it was not actually the complete list. Now I could have said, hey, that's not the complete list, and it probably would have given me the complete list. But why don't we try, like, has anyone heard an air quality related term where you've heard it being thrown around, but you're not really sure what it really means? Let's try it with something. Mike? Oh, well, yeah, that's a great one. Okay. So we said, explain what PM 2.5 is. And boom, it's wow. Firing off. And to me, this is one of the coolest things. Like, okay, we all know we can do a Google search on PM 2.5, and we're going to get links, right? But we're going to have to start clicking around randomly and not really necessarily get a terse answer off the bat. So here we're seeing particulate matter 2.5 micrometers or smaller in diameter. Well, yeah, that's actually correct. And forgive me, I feel like I fight with the trackpads on these. It's really annoying. But it's giving me a whole bunch of information about it. You know, where does PM 2.5 come from? Health impacts.
Along those lines with PM 2.5, what is the difference between AOD and PM 2.5?
Oh, that's a fun one. Okay. And I have another one I want to do later, but. And I'm going to use, by the way, another thing I was noticing yesterday in the unconference was it's very tolerant of typos. Especially if you've established some context already, it can figure out a lot of typos. So I was doing a lot of sloppy typing yesterday, and I was generally figuring out what I meant with when I had a typo. Hang on. All right, let's see what it says. It knew AOD, aerosol optical depth. So it's given me a whole bunch of stuff. Just looking at the end here, what do you think, Elizabeth? Does that look pretty respectable? Can you read it? Respectable to you? That sounds directionally correct to me. I'm not an atmospheric. Oh, okay. So, I default to but I think.
Yeah, sorry, we've got a comment over here.
Okay, and then we had one over there too, but yes.
Hey, so I know nothing about air quality, so I'm a good example. But let's say I downloaded an app and I see in my area that here are some, whatever stats that you're generally presenting to the public, and I want to know is that good? Is that bad? Like, what does that mean? Like, what's the kind of thing that someone who's just getting that kind of public information might put in here and ask it? Like, here's a measurement, that might show up in an app.
Like suppose your air quality index is X.
Oh, okay, yeah, I want to formulate that into a prompt. So help me formulate that into a prompt. Can we do that? Like, if my AQI is 17. Okay, is that reasonably okay? So what I'm seeing as it scrolls is, again, what superficially looks like pretty valid information. Yes, and it does do that a lot. It does that a lot, and I think that's a good thing, that it's not trying to create the impression that this is all good stuff. I also, and it's in the short document that's linked, I would say the old Reagan thing was trust but verify. I would say be skeptical and verify when you're working with this information.
Sure.
Yes.
Yeah, no worries. Something I love to do, and it does tend to do this where it spits out all these paragraphs, but you could just prompt it right here to shorten it into bullet points and then explain it to me as if I was a volcanologist or someone who's totally not in that discipline. So you could try that here.
Let's try it. Okay. It might say, no, you're not, but does that seem like a reasonable prompt? Can you read it? Okay. Oh, yeah, I didn't say bullet points. I'm going to say, so again, we're establishing context, we're building, and we're not, each prompt is not de novo, we're building, so. I played and I asked it, hey, I'm going to a conference of earth science information professionals, what should we be discussing? And it gave me a bunch of stuff that was valid. It was sort of vanilla and generic, but it covered the territory reasonably well. Also, yesterday we wrote a song for the 25th anniversary of ESIP. It wrote lyrics, and then we asked for chords, and it gave us chords, but it couldn't actually play the song. But that was fun, and in a perfect world, we would have pursued that further and generated the song. Let's just try that. That was too long, bullet points, and let's see what it does, right? Is this working for everyone? I mean, are you finding this useful, hopefully? Cool. Okay, it did, I just said bullet points. I didn't have to, and again, it was, I hate to say smart, but it was smart enough to, okay.
Hey,
yes.
thank you. I love this, by the way. Hey, I'm a space weather scientist from NOAA, so I know nothing about air quality except for as a general citizen. I love this session, and I played the same game like during a plenary when Susan was facilitating a conversation with Slido, took screenshots and asked it to say, hey, please summarize all the things we just saw in bullets and whatnot. So I had 2 points I just wanted to share.
Great.
Another part of a community that I work with. One, super awesome, a lot of fun. I think I want to do this at our AI workshop at NOAA in September. Have you thought about, you're kind of highlighting the need to learn how to prompt these tools to get the most out. Then the other part I wanted to sort of suggest and ask, because I don't know the exact answer here, but we've been playing with fine-tuning models like this for bespoke and important communities like geomagnetism, where there's not maybe as much information as you have for air quality out, and getting really good results for really cheap. And I know that this particular tool from OpenAI does, with a subscription or something, offer the ability to fine tune. So that way you've got these huge foundational models, cost a lot. We can't afford to make our own, right?
Yes.
That could be fine tuned to kind of really make sure that it's steering towards what you believe to be the most authoritative information. And that also helps between model training epochs too. So I just wonder if this community is thinking about maybe trying to create applications on these foundational models plus. I don't know if they can do it through this interface, but maybe they can, through this. So that's it, yeah.
I mean, I think that's an excellent point from my perspective, and I know that you can do that. And so when I played with this to try to get to data resources, the results were very disappointing when I was just trying to discover data sources through Chat GPT. But I would see a lot of potential to do that kind of thing, to create an LLM to be much smarter about where do you go for what kind of data. So that, I mean, a lot of the interfaces right now, I won't name any names, they're difficult to navigate. And if you could conversationally just say, I'm looking for this kind of data, and then refine and build on it in a conversational mode like this, I think that would be such a powerful means. And then, of course, if you also have the capability to directly go to the data, which, I think if you're really technically smart, is feasible, that would be pretty darn cool. Let me go to Mark, yes, and then Sky, yeah. We can, I missed that, but we can come back to you, Jim. Mark.
So this is really interesting, and I like what Rob was saying about how you can fine tune, but that works in an area where you are already knowledgeable. And you said be skeptical but verify. But if I'm clueless, how do I verify? And so I'm worried that you start down a path and you start this conversation, you start fine tuning, and somewhere in that conversation it goes wrong, but you don't know, and then you're just doubling down on its stupidity. And that to me is the real worry. I mean, as a tool to help you with something that you're already knowledgeable about, I think that it seems like it's pretty helpful. As a tool to help you with something that you are not knowledgeable about, it seems like you could easily be led astray. So how does one be skeptical and verify?
Well, yeah, I think that's a super question, and I don't have a great answer for that at this point. I will say yesterday, I threw at it, this is only a partial response, but if you're really coming in cold, like, hey, I'm a kindergarten teacher and I keep hearing people talking about DAX, and I don't know what a DAC is, and I threw at it, tell me what a DAX is, and I spelled it DAX, and it couldn't answer that question. So then I spelled the acronym correctly. Okay, well, I saw it, and I still didn't know what it was, but I saw DAACS, and then it understood, and it gave me a semi, but not totally right answer. But yeah, I mean, I think that's a danger. I threw a conspiracy theory at it as a test. I asked it about chemtrails, and I was pleased to see that it came back to me and it said, this is a conspiracy theory and it's not supported by people who've looked into it, yada, yada, yada. And it was actually a pretty good and reassuring response but I think you're pointing to a valid concern, Mark. And I don't have like a super glib answer for it. Yeah, James.
So I guess, well, I'm not sure if these are questions exactly, but I think when people talk about specializing these models for particular areas, they are the notion is to build systems that other people who are not knowledgeable in an area can use, but the people who are doing the specializing are extremely knowledgeable. And so I'll tell you a little bit. So I've been using various AI tools for software development, Google Copilot, and also this exciting Chat GPT and its various incarnations. So basically they've reached into my wallet, which is what they're very good at, but only a little bit. But nonetheless, I found that with software, for fairly rudimentary tasks, these things produce more or less correct software, but for more sophisticated things, what they really do is they push the development group to be much, much better at code review, because a lot of the software that's generated is actually not correct and contains things like security problems and stuff like that. So how do you become good enough to recognize this? Is graduate school. That's how. I mean, you have to, it can do a lot of stuff for you, but it can't make really complicated decisions for you because there's no real understanding behind it, which is why it spits out the exact kind of boilerplate that we ourselves write, because it was trained on the things
Yes.
that we
Yeah.
ourselves write.
Yeah.
So, so I think, there's some caveats, and I look at stuff like this, and I think myself that this is potentially a good way to build a kind of a data discovery tool, because it can talk to you in broad terms about the kinds of data, and then if it was appropriately specialized by experts, it could point you at things. You can use this thing to find OpenDAP servers. But whether the URLs are made up and
Yeah.
merely look like URLs, or whether they're real URLs, is kind of a tough call. So now I will be quiet.
Yeah. Sky.
Yeah, so I mean, Chat GPT and any of these that aren't, connected to a live information set are always going to give you just what they have and what they've been able to get access to. And a lot of the work that I'm doing these days is using Llama Index in particular, and a number of other Python-based interfaces to, both the OpenAI stuff as well as some open source models against massive quantities of stuff that I do know about. I just don't know what's all in there, and I don't know how it's organized, and I don't know how to deal with it necessarily. So the chat stuff, I mean, the AIs, the LLMs themselves do a great job of wading through all of that and what I present to them. But I don't want to give all of that stuff to Chat GPT, and I don't want to give all of that stuff to really any of these, because it's our stuff. We're not releasing that anywhere. We're just using the models to operate against it off of our own systems in some way.
Thanks, Guy. Just one quick other point. In yesterday's unconference, Scott from the New York Times said he's been using it to write code to help him access data for his work that we heard about. And he said the code typically doesn't work right away, but he asked Chat GPT to debug the code it provided him. And apparently he's had really good success, as he called himself an amateur expert, right? By operating that way. So, I mean, he's on deadline, he's got to do stuff quickly. And apparently I'm sure he's not doing the level of sophistication that a lot of you are doing, but apparently he's finding that it's working for him. And that was pretty cool to hear. So yeah, yes.
Oh yeah, thanks. Agreed with everything. And it's not, I think these kinds of tools, as we know, they're not going to solve all our problems, but it's more like, how do you integrate this to best use for open, public, free data? Something like this could be amazing because you're feeding it more open, public information. On that point about not wanting to put in data we don't want to get into these systems.
Yeah.
From a government place, I'm always very concerned about that, of course. On Hugging Face, for example, there are a lot of public, open source, open training data set models there. They're probably not as performant as ChatGPT at the moment, but BERT is a family of models. There's CyBERT, I know the Paul Allen Institute contributed to that. So there's some open models that, if you've got enough resources, you could bring an already trained open model into your protected ecosystem, computer ecosystem, and then add to it for your needs and for your uses. There's also a really great article from the Stanford Human-Centered AI group. It's called it's from February in case you want to look it up. It's How Do We Fix and Update Large Language Models? And it's a really cutting edge research on, hey, this thing costs a lot to make. Somebody else made it. We can't afford to make our own. I know at NOAA we don't have resources to do that. And it's about bringing things like knowledge graphs in, databases in, to keep these things guardrailed, and also to provide new information. It's called external memory, is the term people have been using, to provide the information between the massive training epochs. So just something to, if you have any interest, called How Do We Fix and Update Large Language Models from the Stanford group. Oh, when you, so for in this case, scan the entire internet, bring that huge corpus in, create a large language model that I don't think they do that constantly. They constantly do reinforcement learning though.
Right.
Yeah, so
right.
it's more like how often does one train on a massive corpus to create some word similarity
Yeah.
and other, abilities. Really expensive to do. And so these are some techniques for, thanks, Mark, that was a great question. There's some techniques for what can you do to keep these things performant between, and also what can you do to benefit specific community needs, depending on which model you might choose to leverage.
And yeah, really good input. And please, it would be great to put resource links into the document. I know there is a lot of open source activity, and I know a lot of us would be interested in open source, exactly the type of work that you're describing. So that would be really great. Yes, please. Perfect. Yeah. Yeah. I also, just as a sidebar note, you mentioned space weather. I did ask in a separate chat about my obsession about relationships between cosmic rays and lightning activity. And I got a decent answer back that I thought that was kind of impressive as sort of a knowledge discovery kind of thing. So like, if you're the kind of person who's trying to draw sort of wacky connections and explore, again, as sort of a point of departure, potentially a fun, fun way to get you started. Now, I asked it for reference and it talked about the hypothesis, and I think it gave me a couple of papers that might be right, but we asked it for the DOIs and it gave us invented DOIs. So another example of, you can get into problems. Yes.
Yes. So just a bit more color on Mark's question about, this transfer of knowledge from experts to users of models. So like 3 weeks ago, I was in San Francisco at this big industry conference, data and AI conference, and the agenda had been published, and then like 3 months before the conference, they pivoted the whole thing to large language models. So there's quite a bit of discussion there. And Mark Andreessen and Eric Schmidt were there, and they were sanguine about the dangers of these things. It's going to be great. It's going to be great. Don't worry. They didn't really mention the dangers of having global capitalism with their hands on these things, but that's not. It wasn't that conference. But one of the things they talked a lot about is that, like, the general purpose app is not what people should be using. Like, that's fun. There's a lot of things you can do with it, but it's much more going to be about creating your own applications using this model, which costs almost $1 billion to produce. And so there's different tricks for making applications that have your knowledge embedded in there. So one of the things is like prompt engineering. So you have your own app, and someone types the question in, and before you submit it to Chat GPT, you inject a bunch of context. So maybe you formulate a question and get back some information that you can then do some database queries, or maybe you provide column names from your database or different things. And apparently one trick is you can add to your prompt, if you don't know, say I don't know, and that shuts down a lot of the hallucinations. But anyway, so that's one technique, is this like prompt engineering of stuffing extra context in there. The other thing, which is very exciting, is embeddings, where you take your own corpus of documents and you create these magical vectors out of them. You stick that into a database, and then you can look. So you take the question that someone asked, you look for similar documents, and you tell Chat GPT, when you're answering this question, refer to these documents, and it'll read them and pull out relevant information. And so I would say that doesn't count as giving our data to Chat GPT, but maybe it does, I don't know. And so one of the things I'm just nerdily interested in is, this is extremely meta nerd, of taking the ESIP bylaws and policies, because I'm on the governance committee, and make a bot that you can ask it policy questions about ESIP. But definitely specialized applications with your data is the way that we'll be using these models. Yeah,
I also prompt engineering. I hear that that's actually a hot job area right now and apparently being well paid. So a tip maybe to some of you that, you might want to look into becoming a prompt engineer, although 2 years from now, it'll probably be obsolete, but yeah. I know it looks like we have some participants, remote participants. So for those of you who are remote, please, if you want to ask a question or comment, raise your hand, please, on Zoom, and we'll try to get to you. So we don't want to ignore you. Or type in the chat. Right. Thank you, Sruthi. Okay. Other questions? Or I was going to say explain PM 2.5 to a 5-year-old. And let's see how it does with one funny thing I noticed, sometimes it doesn't auto scroll and you don't realize it is answering. So that's happening right now. And I just have to realize it is. So here we go. We had some really good 5-year-old explanations yesterday, but so here we go. What do you think? This pretty advanced 5-year-old. Yeah.
My 5-year-old grandson wouldn't even sit still to try to read that, so.
So I'm gonna say, hey, if you're an ESIP member, 5-year-old, dude. All right, well, now this is closer. I said that was too advanced, and this seems a little bit closer to the mark for a 5-year-old. Okay, go for words with one syllable.
Steve, if you get a chance, would you mind trying my question about the toxicity of the air in Denver and who is creating it? I want to see if I get a better answer now that I've had a conversation with it about certain polluters.
Okay, bring me back to that in a second.
Yeah. You don't have to do it right now.
So this is, but notice that they did use tiny, and that's not one syllable. But maybe it couldn't think of, maybe it didn't like small dust, and so tiny or, but I mean, I even like keep air clean for health. It's sort of like a nice admonition to a 5-year-old. So
I think my grandson could sit still for that sentence.
So Beth's question, so Beth and I did this earlier, and what I could see was that Chat GPT didn't know about the toxics release inventory that EPA has. And so I'm going to try this, and I have no idea whether it's going to help or not, but I'm going to try it. Let's see how it comes back. Yeah, so it's telling me, sorry, dude, I don't have access to specific databases. It actually knew what TRI was. So we'll go ahead and ask, but we're not going to get a super satisfactory answer. Typo. Let's try it like so. I do love it that it's typo tolerant, because I mean, like, for decades of working with computers, like I am a terrible typist and I always have to fix my typos, right? And Chat GPT doesn't care. I mean, some typos might be consequential, but as a general rule, it rolls right by, it figures out what you meant, which that's kind of handy for some things. So it looks like, I saw this a lot. It looks like a highly generic answer to the question. But let's.
That's what I was looking for. That's the information I was looking for, that I had to finally say, what about Suncor? Because it wouldn't mention it after like 5 different queries.
I have no idea, but I know how to spell Suncor now, I think. Yeah, that would be consequential. Let's see what it. Oh. Well, it does know something about Suncor. So okay, it wasn't able to tell me that Suncor is a problem directly, but when I asked it about Suncor, it looks like some potentially useful information.
I think it's saying one of the earlier prompts that was trained on data in September 2021.
Yes, right. Again, there is that limitation
Yeah,
of the
that's
training.
that's what I was going to mention too, is that I heard that Chat GPT stopped at 2021 with
Correct.
its input.
And I think it came up earlier. It's super expensive to train these large language models that are scanning the entire internet. So they're not doing it every day or even every year. Yeah, Dave.
Yeah, Steve, I was just wondering, what does anybody know about any algorithms, or maybe you can type it into Chat GPT as well to see if a particular answer was generated from Chat GPT, right? So I've heard a lot of issues in the education area where kids are just asking Chat GPT to write their papers.
Yeah.
And I understand there's some work going on that can figure out whether or not that paper was written by Chat GPT.
Yeah, I mean, my understanding is that there are a number of tools, and it sounds like a rapidly evolving space that will help you find cases like that.
I think I saw an article in the New York Times, though, about using AI to detect AI-generated images, and not always, they were not always successful.
In today's New York Times, just in the little summary newsletter, I haven't read the details, but apparently Google and OpenAI have voluntarily signed on to the federal government's ethical guidelines or something, and one of which includes watermarking AI-generated images and text.
Oh, interesting.
So I think that could be really helpful.
James. Wait, yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Although, how do we know they're actual? Anyways. So when we say it's trained on the whole internet, what does the whole internet mean? Does anybody know exactly the extent of the training?
Well, of course, it's not exactly really the whole internet. I mean, it's textually based for starters, but apparently the GPT LLMs do ingest a lot of social media, and that's one reason why people have encountered issues, because so you could argue that it's contaminated by definitely questionable information. Now, like I said, I was impressed that it understood that chemtrails was a conspiracy theory, because it has to have ingested chemtrails stuff in social media that by people who were believers. But yeah, so that and that's one of the reasons why people are interested in constrained LLMs that are only using reliable, information and potentially domain specific, as I understand it. Microphone. It's for the sake of our virtual.
So do you know of any work to do things like train a large language model on, say, the corpus of IEEE papers or all of the ACM papers or something like that?
Well, the point came up about embeds or embeddings, and again, this is sort of over my head technically, but my understanding is that that's sort of a workaround to help take a generic LLM and orient it more heavily, I'm using lay language here, towards a corpus that you provided, if that makes sense. I played with, I asked it, can I get you to basically work with the US Code and the Code of Federal Regulations and give them priority? And it said yes. And so I said, do that. And I was planning to play with some more intricate regulatory type questions and see how it did, but I ran out of time to really pursue that particular thread. But that seemed like it could be interesting. I mean, if you could basically just say it, I want you to give priority to something that is sitting online that, is probably in the model already, that might have some potential. I'd love to, it says we're sort of equality focused here. Does anyone, there have to be some questions in the group where more questions where you've heard the term, but you don't really understand it, or you'd like to hear more about it. So anyone got any more of those? What a shy group. Or else you already know air quality so well that you don't need to ask the question. What about, hang on, Elizabeth, use the mic. I heard Suncor, I think.
Dust score.
Dust score.
I don't know what that is.
We don't know what that
is
is.
that-
Okay, let's find out.
I know, is that one word or, well,
Good one, Elizabeth.
yeah, I definitely don't know that one. So I'm going to assume it's one word, which may or may not be correct. It's doing that annoying thing again where it didn't auto scroll. By the way, you see how it's saying regenerate response? If you get a response that you're really unsatisfied with, you can ask it to regenerate, and the regenerated one might be better. So, that's something you can play with. And also they do ask you to rate responses with a thumbs up or thumbs down, because they are constantly working on this. So, if you get a really crappy response, you can give it a thumbs down, and that might actually help make it smarter over time. So, okay, it didn't auto scroll. So this is a slightly nuanced, does not appear to be a widely recognized or commonly used term. Yeah. If you can provide more context or specific details. It is 2 words, yeah. So I'm just going to say dust score with a space. I don't have to repeat all the, I could just say dust score, right? And I think it's basically saying dunno. Now,
Why is nitrous oxide a problem?
okay. Yeah, so I think figuring out ways, if you want to make your information or products more discoverable is a fruitful area. Can I say NOx? Is that okay? I'm going to say, why is NOx, can I say so prevalent? I'm going to say that. And if you don't know what NOx is, it'll tell you. So I said NOx, and it's reminding me that that's nitrogen oxides. At the kind of 40,000 foot level. Oh yeah, it's even got the lightning angle, which I think is kind of interesting. That lightning generates NOx. I believe that's valid. Oh, and microbial activity. Yeah, so I don't know, to me, that's actually a pretty good answer. Throw some more out, or else I have to do it. You don't want me to do that. Yes. Yeah.
I'm having trouble getting a list of references. Can you ask it to, let's say, if I want a certain subject, I want to get some relevant papers. I wonder, is there a way to get that from Chat GPT, or it needs to be more innovated?
So I think there's a partial answer to that. So let's try the lightning and NOx thing as an example, okay? Can you point me to some papers on lightning and NOx? Now this is where we might encounter hallucination. Oh, man. I want specific papers. Yeah, it's not gonna. So that was a bust. Now, when I asked it about the cosmic rays and lightning, I was able to get a couple papers out of it, although I didn't double check. So, yeah, well, yeah, paywalls, right. I mean, maybe it couldn't get to, yeah. Yeah.
Can you say journal reference instead of papers?
Okay. But, yeah. Well, first, let's just say journal references. It's just not going for that one.
I would like to say this should not be characterized as a bust. This is an advancement for them because they're not giving fake information is what they've been doing for the last year. So many, library requests, just completely fake information. So it can't provide that, so it's not. And so I would say, congratulations, OpenAI.
So we sort of broke it on this one, but it was a good try. And like I said, on the cosmic rays and lightning, it gave me fake DOIs.
Is this also because it doesn't want us to know which papers it's plagiarizing? There's a lawsuit right now.
Well, it's not plagiarizing. I mean, it's ingesting. It's sort of different. Let's.
To some extent, you can get this stuff by web searches. So I guess I've found working with the chat engines, it's better to actually think forward a little bit toward the synthesis. What are you really interested in? Not just give me a bunch of references, but what's the synthesis that you're interested in? What's the current state of research? And what are the research questions being asked in this area? You're not always going to get that because it's not always, doesn't always have access to that. Sometimes the Edge version of this, the Bing version of this that's working against a version of Chat GPT, but is looking across the entire internet, is going to give you better responses around some of those kinds of things on references and that kind of stuff, right? But this is really about, the synthesis questions that we're asking next if we were to go read those papers. So ask those kinds of questions.
Yeah, great point. I'm just going to hit it with how does lead get into the air and see how it responds to that. Okay.
Hello. Yeah. So I was trying parallel to do the same thing with Bard and ChatGPT, and Bard gave me data about the EPA TLI database. So I retrieved that. It knew what dust score was, and it also gave me the enlightening answer that properly. So it seems that if one doesn't give you the answer, try something else, or to try them both at the same time to see which one works better. So because they are all trained different things, so they all don't know of all the answers, but it seems each of them has a different focus on what they are good at.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for that. And yeah, I didn't mention Bard, and I had hoped to spend more time playing with it. So Bard is basically Microsoft's kind of instantiation of GPT 3.5 or 4, but they're trying to build on top of it. I see head shaking. I'm sorry, I'm mixing up. Thank you, I'm mixing up my platforms. It's big, well, they're building it into Bing. Yeah, sorry, I misspoke.
Steve, yesterday you're in the unconference session. You said you were using GPT Chat 3.5. Is that still the case here?
Yeah, in fact, at the top there, you see how it's showing me that we're on the default, which is still 3.5, but 4 has now been opened up. I should do disclosure. I paid up $20 to get a Plus account, which for Chat GPT, which theoretically means I get more priority for processing queries. So I'm getting faster responses. And if I wasn't a Plus, I might have to wait longer depending on how busy it is. So I should have mentioned that earlier. But yeah, Bard is definitely something that you may want to experiment with if you haven't already, the Google thing. Although I've also read that someone was saying, Google is very disappointed. They feel like Bard is a failure. I don't know if that was reliable information. Microsoft is definitely very busy with what they're trying to do with their Bing, kind of bringing LLM tech. I think it is based on OpenAI's on the GPT models, but bringing it in to. Oh, do we have a participant?
Oh, yeah. I was going to say to your question earlier, if people are training language models on papers, there are some, I needed to look it up, but there are some groups that are starting to do that. There's one called Climate BERT, like a pre-trained language model for climate and health related texts, where they took a bunch of papers and trained it. There's this project called the Alexandria Index that's done word embeddings for everything on archive so that you can start doing that. So there are some groups that are starting to work on it, and specifically in the climate space. Yeah, I can put the links.
Oh yeah, there also, I think it was in Nature, there was a little, I'd call it more like a news article that talked about academic variations on LLM chat tech, and they were pointing to several academically science-oriented projects that sounded interesting, and maybe we can track that down and add that to our document later, probably. But I didn't have a chance to experiment with those platforms, but it sounded interesting because they were science-focused, and a big part of it was you won't need to worry about hallucinations, if you're using these platforms. So that's something you might want to investigate.
And I also have a question. Sorry. To someone's earlier comment about using this for synthesis, I wonder if you copy pasted like a journal article, how well, and then said can you summarize this as a 5-year-old? Can you summarize this for a policymaker? Different audiences, how well that would do. I've been meaning to try it, but I haven't tried it yet.
Yeah. I mean, totally. Although again, there could be that concern that now it's being grabbed by OpenAI, and so if the paper is behind a paywall or something, but you've copied and pasted it, that could get a little dicey. But it will definitely do that type of stuff if you feed it into it and ask it to. Yeah, I probably. Just one other thing. I said this yesterday, but if you've got a bunch of disorganized ideas and you throw them into Chat GPT and ask it to organize and synthesize, it's going to be kind of generic, but it's going to do like a first cut at that might really help you if you're trying to clean up your crazy, creative thinking or whatever.
So it's interesting that you say that, because that's pretty much exactly the question I was going to ask. How do you do that? Like, for example, I have to write these summary reports constantly. And so I have these input documents that go into it and I summarize them. And it's extremely tedious. And I was thinking maybe I could use Chat GPT for that. And I tried and it didn't work. So, okay, so tell me a bit more about how you did that, please. And then also I have a colleague who said, oh, well, I just finished this book and I used Chat GPT to write the index for me. And I thought, wow, that's really cool. But then I was in a bar and we had to go somewhere else. And so I never found out how. So has anybody had any experience with stuff like that? And can you tell me how you did that?
Well, no, but I'm going to conjecture that you hadn't really established some context for it yet before you asked it to take your input and, summarize or whatever. So maybe if you build up some upfront context first in the conversation and then fed it your input, you might get a more satisfactory result if you do it that way. So that might be worth trying. Like give it some kind of generic context setting information that's off the shelf before you give it the actual thing that you want it to summarize, and give that a try. Oh, that's an interesting way to think about it.
So I've been doing this with a massive collection of our internal USGS stuff. So we use this, obscure system to do all of our budget management and everything else with stuff. So we've got all of these project tasks and subtask narratives that people write up about the work that they're doing. And one of the things that we've been trying to get at is, what is the current work that's going on? These are descriptions of things that we don't put online right now. I mean, we've got about 6,000 documents out there that talk about our projects and that sort of thing. But there's this whole internal suite of stuff that we're really trying to get a handle on. What is everybody doing? And where's the state of research in all these different areas and whatnot? So massive quantity of text. I've done kind of standard NLM stuff with that and entity recognition and whatnot for a while and never really gotten the best kinds of results that I want to out of that. Doing this work with even some of the fairly simple large language models out there across those big old corpuses of text, these big blobs of things, has really proven very, very good. I mean, we're getting nice structured data back, basically asking things like, give me all of the terms and definitions for things within all of these texts. And it'll go through and give us these major concepts, and it'll tell us what they mean in that context. This isn't stuff coming out of the large language models. This is just the large language models knowing how to read a lot of stuff really, really fast. Yeah, this is internal code because it's all internal stuff, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
The next step on this, so that's all based on building prompts and passing those into the system. It's not based on a back and forth learning model like you get in these kinds of interfaces. So what a bunch of people are putting out now are these kinds of interfaces that let you go back and forth on it as a human, where you want to ask that corpus something and then get something back from that. So the really cool use case that we're working on there is taking, we've got over a decade of synthesis publications that have come out of our Powell Center, our John Wesley Powell Center. And we're trying to figure out what are the resource management connections from the knowledge that's coming through those papers to things like environmental assessments and land management plans and those kinds of things. These are totally disconnected. They don't get cited in the way that we want them to, but there are logical connections between those, between the knowledge that's come out of those papers and this, and that's going to be a back and forth chat thing. And we've done just a little bit of setup with it, but we got to actually build the application. And the cool thing is that there's a bunch of open source apps that are basically doing this same kind of thing that you can configure and run yourself and whatever infrastructure it is that you want to run them against. So there's tremendous potential there, but again, it's more about using something that really knows how to read really well and give us structured information back in ways that we can digest and understand, as opposed to, giving us the magic answer. But it's reading stuff that we're giving it to read.
Very cool. I see it. And Ben, Beth. Thank you.
So I know another thing that these models are capable of doing is scraping web pages. So maybe we could find a table, like a web page that contains a table on it, and ask it to scrape the data off that table and return it as a JSON document.
Oh, interesting.
Does anyone have like a? No, I thought they. Okay. Never mind. Let's not do that one. So yeah, right. Mm-hmm. Right. Historic. It has to be historic from 2021, but yes. So not to advertise Microsoft, but I have been using the Edge. They actually convinced me to install the Edge browser on my laptop, and it is a pretty good experience.
There's something out there called Web Chat GPT that's like a plugin. Well, I think it's a browser extension that I started to try to play with, and I was underwhelmed. But it allegedly allowed you to connect Chat GPT to web access. So that, and I expect we're going to see a lot more movement in that kind of space probably next week or whatever at the rate things are going. But that's out there. But I was like, again, limited time to play with it. I was not like super excited, but potential. And I think the whole plugin thing, if you're smarter than I am technically, you could probably be doing some pretty interesting things with plugins that are out there. They were restricting them. I think you needed a Plus account to work with Chat GPT plugins. I don't think they've opened that up yet. They may have. And also, if you're experimenting, there are differences between GPT 3.5 and GPT 4. And if you want to experiment, you might find that interesting just to kind of do A/B testing between the two of them and, see what your user experience is. Yesterday, Ted Haberman, I think out of the blue, Ted said, ask it, anyway, somehow we got onto this thing about how is data like a river? And we actually got some really interesting stuff out of Chat GPT, analogies between data and a river. And I was talking about flows and reservoirs and all this stuff. And Ted was like really jazzed. He was thinking, I could use some of this stuff, as sort of like that first cut of ideas, I asked it, okay, we've been talking about air quality. How can you relate what we've talked about on AQ to water quality? So shifting domains from one, environmental realm to another. And I felt like, it was somewhat generic, but its response was pretty good. I mean, it saw the analogies between the air quality domain and water quality, and it was like, if I was doing some sort of thing where I wanted to get people thinking, this would be a point of departure for me to, you want to talk about monitoring, remote sensing technology, in situ technology, pollution sources, where's the pollution coming from, controls. It did a pretty good job of analogizing. between the two domains. So I thought that was quite interesting. And that's actually archived in this chat. So like if you really want to play, you could go back and see what it did when I asked it that question. And like I said earlier, when I asked it, give me some prompts that community members should be using to learn more about their air quality, the prompts were pretty good. And I did use one of them. And, you know, so, and I got a pretty good answer, I thought, when I used that prompt. Dave.
Steve, I think I saw in the App Store for the iPhone, you can download an avatar that will answer your questions using Chat GPT, right? So now they're evolving into perhaps people that you can define yourself, and they will answer your questions just like Chat GPT.
The pace of evolution in this space is pretty mind-boggling, and but I do think that the hype. I joked yesterday about Skynet. There is a fear factor out there. I feel like what we're seeing right now is fundamentally dumb. It's different, but it's not. I mean, this is not real artificial intelligence where it's like thinking in quotes. There isn't like really an inference engine at work in this technology, so it can be really dumb about a lot of things. Like there's been a lot of buzz about how it can't do a math problem for you. It won't necessarily say that 2 + 2 = 4, right? So that's a limitation. I'm not convinced that what we're seeing in this realm ought to be real scary, except that it's going to change things. I mean, some tedious things that people are doing right now, this technology is going to do that for you. But we've seen those kinds of evolutions before with technology. So
I would just add too, Steve, that there are a lot of people out there who will believe anything, right? And so when you look at a certain population out there that might read this stuff, bogus or not, and believe it because it's being typed out automatically from them and they have no idea where it's coming from, and it's coming so fast that there probably is a real danger to it.
Yeah, and I mean, Mark pointed that out. And yeah, I mean, there's risks. I mean, what technology is free from risk? You could ask, I mean, cars are very dangerous, or hammers are dangerous, but yeah, for sure. Yes.
Yeah, so the most worrying things that I've heard of in AI are the AIs that are manipulating the physical world, like doing experiments. If it could do something without supervision, it could do something really problematic, like make a terrible pathogen or blow up the lab or something of that nature. And as far as I know, those sorts of experiments are happening in like materials science and things of that nature.
The dumbest AI can do it.
Yeah. And the other thing that I'm a little concerned about, that's maybe related to the last person's concern, is an AI created or inspired cult.
Ooh. Yeah. Never say never. In fact, there probably already is one, actually, and we just don't know about it. But there clearly are. There's clearly risks and things to watch out for. But I'd still come back to every technology brings, hopefully new benefits, but also new risks.
Wasn't there also a thing of people falling in love with their AI's partners?
Well, I didn't try to reproduce any of the crazy conversations that we were hearing about, several months ago. It was all over mass media, right, about like the person who got angry with the user, the Chat GPT getting mad at the user and the love stuff. And I suspect, but I don't know, that these were context-free conversations, or maybe the context that the person established was like sort of a wacky initial context that tended to encourage wacky behavior by Chat GPT, but
I think the risks are much more prosaic. That I mean, we know that there are issues with data bias, misleading AI, and we've seen this repeatedly in the social sciences.
Yes.
There's no reason to assume that it doesn't apply to the geophysical sciences, and we know there's biases in our data, and we know that there's biases that we don't know in our data, and AI could just reinforce that and lead us down false paths. So it could be, it could lead to scientific error, but scientific error could have significant consequences.
Yeah.
So I think the thing that worries me most about these things is the complete opacity of them. That and so we don't know what its corpus is, this Chat GPT's, and we don't know what its algorithm is. So you have to be more than skeptical. You basically, if you're doing like real science with it, you cannot trust it if you cannot verify it. If you cannot, that's not science, right? So that I think, it's not the end of the world type of risks, or that it's going to conquer humanity. It's that it's going to mislead us in harmful ways.
Yeah, well said, Mark, for sure.
Yeah, but isn't that also true of things like Google? Yeah, well, people are. Well, discovering data sets, and maybe looking for algorithms. Yeah. I think it's similar.
I suspect that we'll see more emphasis on traceability over time, where they're building tools that do allow you to trace, well, how did you arrive at that, basically, and trace back so you can better evaluate the response that you're getting. But we certainly aren't there right now. Yeah.
Well, I agree with what both of you guys were saying, and aside from the actual experiments that are being produced by the AIs, it is a very similar context of the ease of use is indeed its greatest strength and its greatest weakness. So, what we saw when Google and search engines started was that those things were immediately implemented in, we need to teach our 8-year-olds how to use this, our 10-year-olds how to use this, our 12-year-olds how to use this. I think the problem we have right now is just not wanting to do a false start of we don't know what this is exactly. We don't know where it's going to land, who's going to have access to it. But all of a sudden we need to create educational materials about it somehow. And so that's a little just tricky. We're in a tricky time.
Yep. But another well said.
So I guess I disagree with you, Mark. I don't want to overblow the worry about a lot of this stuff, and I think to some extent it helps us to think about this thing as a persona. Think about it as a real entity that you're interacting with here. One of the other projects we're working on with a DARPA challenge right now, we've been doing some sort of preloading work to this DARPA challenge with some colleagues at JPL, and we were kind of working through some examples of things that we were hoping our performers were going to dig into using AI against a whole suite of documents and other data sets and things we have to work against. And we were examining some of the answers that were coming back from, prompt back and forth with chat-based use of some of the AIs. And one of our assessment geologists said, well, most of the answers that are coming out here are true and they're decent, but they're not fully true. It's basically like sitting down and having a good conversation with a good grad student who's read a lot, and they've come back with a set of responses and ideas, but they're not all together there. Another colleague of mine, and some of yours too, Yolanda Gill, refers to these as AI scientists that are starting to develop. So think of it as an assistant, as a grad student, as somebody who you are working with, but you're not just taking everything it gives you and just going and running with it or doing anything with it. You're critically evaluating with it and bringing it into your research and figuring out, okay, where do I go with this? What do I do next? How do we learn together, both the AI and our human intelligence toward the science and the research that we're trying to pursue? So I just wouldn't worry about it to that effect, but.
This is fun. I like it. I like it.
No, I don't want to overstate it. I don't want to be like too paranoid. But we only know what we know. And so we have detected when in the past when AI has been wrong, but we don't know when we haven't been able to detect it. So for an example, people were using AI to machine learning algorithms to find indicators in lung X-rays that would show propensity towards lung cancer. That you're going to be early stages of lung cancer. So early detection is really key. So ran thousands of X-rays through it or whatever, and it looked like that there was one hospital that was particularly inclined to have more lung cancer. And so that's obviously a red flag. And we know that sort of thing in science. And what it turns out was that that hospital was tending to scan a little bit later in the process. So, it was a month later, so things were a little bit more developed. And, but what the AI keyed in on was the little lead thing that they put on that labeled what it was. So it just keyed in on that as the indicator that, oh, it's this hospital always has lead. So it was giving a lot of false positives. So that's something that we detected, right? But what if we didn't detect that? That's the thing, is that I think you're absolutely right. You need to come at it critically. And I like your analogy of, a conversation with a graduate student. It's like, yeah. But what if the graduate student just makes something up that you didn't know, and you take that at face value? And then the problem is that when you miss something, it can reinforce it. That's where we've seen the problems emerge, and this is old news, the hiring at Amazon, the prison recidivism and things like that. So it has caused problems already. So why would we not assume that it's not going to cause problems in the future?
Wait. We have to try to use the mic just so.
Well, Sky asked, was it causing the problems, or was it the humans? With the hiring algorithms of Amazon, it was creating the problems because it was reinforcing. The humans created the problems in the first place with their biases, and then it doubled down on that. But what I'm saying is that we know there's biases in our data, but we don't always know what the biases are, and it is going to be better at being misled by those biases because it will reinforce it as it goes.
And say something. It sounds like critical thinking is the problem, right? Or a lack of critical thinking is part of the problem, and that we're experiencing less and less critical thinking as technology takes over for us. And so, because your examples sound to me like situations in which humans, or you say, well, what if you take at face value this false thing that the graduate student presented to you? And that to me sounds like, I'm going to agree that it's a human problem, that we shouldn't take things at face value, that, we need to continue engaging our critical thinking skills, and we do that less and less. And that, I think, is a problem, that we do that less and less as technology gets more and more advanced. And so somehow we need to combat our tendency to decline to think critically as these tools get more advanced.
Yeah, think of it as like peer review of a scientific paper, peer review of a AI output. And there was these issues were discovered because somebody looked at it and said, "Hey, there's something funny there. Let me investigate it." So I don't see much difference between that and like a graduate student or some other paper. It has to be looked at critically.
Well, and maybe we've been there, we didn't realize it, the whole crisis of reproducibility, right? That we thought that we were getting all this sound research, and yet it turns out a lot of it isn't reproducible. maybe some of these tools could actually help flag reproducibility issues. Who knows? Yeah.
I think part of it is also that I think critical thinking is needed, that's true, but then you're for the example, the prison recidivism problem, like they were trying to use machine learning to make their jobs easier. So they were like, oh, there's this new technology that can speed up the process of evaluating these prisoners, and so we're going to use it without maybe evaluating, and as technology advances, like you end up using this technology to make your job easier, but then sometimes that ends up perpetuating the existing biases that were already there. So I feel like I'm not articulating this well, but I guess the motivation that prompts you to use a technology like this might not also give you enough time to pause and think like, oh, are we doing this correctly? Like we might be thinking, oh, we need to use this critically, but there are lots of people that are like, oh, this is really interesting, sophisticated technology. We need to use this right now to increase our profits, to make our jobs easier, whatever it is. There are lots of people that are not going to be thinking about the biases in the data, the biases in the technologies, the inherent problems that are built into it. So I think every technology does come with risks, but there needs to be a lot of people who are making sure that the technology is being deployed in responsible ways, because lots of people are not going to think about that. They're just going to think about the benefit of using the technology.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Ruthie. We are closing in on 1 p.m., which is, I want to do a hard stop when we're supposed to end. I will say I'm thrilled that so many people have come for this session and stuck with it. I just keep coming back to, and I want to say thank you to all of you. I just keep coming back to that point of departure thing, and I'm convinced that if we back up and we think about regular people in communities who are like the people who, for the first time with smoke events, they're really thinking more than they have in the past about air quality because they just got hit by a smoke plume from Canada, and they want to explore, well, what's going on, and just sort of get oriented, and maybe they're hearing some of the terminology like PM 2.5 and they don't know it, as a point of departure for helping community members. I see huge potential. The conversational interaction, I think, is going to be friendlier for regular people. The fact that it doesn't just throw links at you, but it gives you some contextual information, I think is going to be helpful. But I think we're all talking about how there are risks, and you don't want people to blindly, take what they're getting and just assume that it's truth. But the positive potential, I think, is really exciting. And I also, I think for sort of our ESIP world, the potential to bridge a lot of our domain experts just unconsciously are using terminology that's alien to people who are coming from other, milieus, or however you want to put it. And so the potential to help bridge between the scientific expertise and the users, the end users who are regular folks, I think the potential is really exciting. And I think that ESIP people in general can make huge contributions here, and it'll be good for all of our data providers. You all want people to use your data. And to the degree that this technology can help more people use your data, hopefully fruitfully, to make the world a better place, that would be really phenomenal. So I hope we can all kind of work collectively in that direction while not ignoring, the risks that are real. Dave, did you want to say something? If it's quick, 30 seconds. Mike. You got the last word.
Actually,
So it better be good.
It has nothing to do with AI, but I just wanted to share with everybody. I was on it this morning. I was on a call, a 2-hour telecon with just about every state in the country about the upcoming UPS strike.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if you were aware of that, but on July 31st, UPS 330,000 workers are going to be likely going on strike. And the big discussion among all the states and DHS and FEMA was the delivery of medical supplies and medicine and things like that. So I would just encourage you to follow what's going on. And if you have any distinct needs for medication, it might be impacted by the supply chain that's going to be, they said UPS will start to scale back in the amount of packages that they actually accept to ship 72 hours before the strike. So that means next Friday, a week from today. So just in case any of you have any needs there, you might want to act on it sooner than later.
Thanks for that, Dave. And so thanks again to everyone. And, I like the interactivity and a lot of good discussion. By all means, please, if you have a resource or you just have some more thoughts that you'd like to get out there on the record, go to our document. Thanks. Let's bring it up again. And, and also if you didn't sign in, but, you all were great. Sorry, that's a Southernism. I'm sort of semi-Southern. A wonderful final session as far as I'm concerned. So my thanks to all of you. Thank you. And safe travels to everyone. Getting home, wherever home is. That was great.